Okay, I'm Councilmember Joe Buscaino, Vice Chair of Public Safety Committee. I'm joined by Mr. Mitch O'Farrell. Today is Friday, November 14th. Welcome to the Public Safety Committee meeting. We have a number of agenda items, and what we'll do is go through the agenda now and comb through it. Right. We, due to the lack of quorum, we are not obligated to take public comment at this point. So we will not do public comment today due to the lack of quorum. We only have Mr. O'Farrell and I. So with that, we will note your cards and take the items before us. If I can just direct you to the agenda. Please don't interrupt the meeting, otherwise I'll ask you to be removed. Thank you. So with that, Mr. O'Farrell, if you're okay with this, we'll take items 1 through 11 on consent.
Yes.
Okay, that'll be the order.
Council members, good morning. John White, City Clerk. Items 1 through 5 have CA reports that were submitted after the publication of the agenda. Do you wish to approve those reports as part of your actions on those items?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take then item number 12. I believe that's the report from the fire department on the Port of Los Angeles fire.
No public comment today. No public comment. Yeah, thank you.
If you can read item 12 into the record, please.
Item 12, motion Buscaino Bonin instructing the LAFD to report relative to its response to the September 22nd, 2014 fire at the Port of Los Angeles, including information on how long it took for first responders to arrive on scene, the number and types of LAFD units that responded, and how many responders from other jurisdictions aided LAFD in extinguishing the fire.
Thank you. Let me start by saying I too was on scene the evening of the 22nd of September at the Port of Los Angeles, and in communication with Chief Terrazas, was just really proud and impressed by the overall response of all agencies involved, from, of course, our fire department, both on the dock and on the water. A debt of gratitude to the Long Beach Fire Department and the great command structure that brought in LAPD and Port Police. Even we folded in AQMD on the air quality issues, as well as LA Unified School Districts, because the fire impacted the air quality in and around the Wilmington, San Pedro, Palos Verdes, Long Beach area. We brought in the school district to advise the schools, nearby schools, of the incident. It was just a proud 2 days of the active response from all levels of government. So we want to get an update on pretty much the incident and the fire in itself, and maybe some lessons learned as well moving forward. Thank you. I believe Chief Gomez is going to take it from here.
Good morning, sirs. My name is Ray Gomez, LA City Fire Department, Battalion 6. I've been down in Battalion 6 for 5 years now. The day that I took off, Chief Gutierrez
welcome, right?
And he got the war fire, so he's going to be presenting the incident. I think we're going to be able to answer your questions during the presentation.
Thank you. Go ahead. Thank you.
Good morning, Steve Gutierrez, Battalion Chief. I'm currently assigned to our incident restraining section. As Chief Gomez mentioned, I was working the day the incident unfolded. That was September 22nd, 2014. We're going to go through kind of a PowerPoint, touch on a few things. We'll make it fairly brief, however, some things that were impactful during the incident, as well as some things that lessons learned in terms of strategy, tactics, some new technology, and some needed resource needs that are needed down in the port itself. So the incident itself unfolded on September 22nd, 2014. Initially was dispatched as a boat fire, and with the boat fire, you get a dispatch which is basically an alarm assignment with us, which includes 2 boats, 1 larger boat, 1 smaller boat, land resources, and a battalion chief. Upon initial arrival, the first arrival on scene was Boat 17, which is one of the smaller boats. Currently, it's a boat that's loaned from Port Police, correct? Has no pumping capacity. Originally arrived on scene first, approximately within 6 minutes. Gave a size up, which indicated there was a fire that involved the dockside, wooden dockside, small, and I think he said approximately 10 feet of wharf was involved. Subsequent to that, one of the larger boats, Boat 4, arrived on scene, gave a much more comprehensive size up, which said that the fire was now starting to extend. Approximately 2 minutes later, I arrived on scene. At that time, we had all the initial resources on scene and determined the fire was clearly now starting to escalate.
This is the business, Pasha Stevedore, at 802 South Freeze. And this is a photo of the building, the sister building next to the building that was involved. They're basically a large warehouse. The building that was involved was approximately about 800 feet long. This is what it does. It ships these rows of steel. And this is
It's considered a break bulk terminal, right?
Yes, break bulk terminal, correct, sir. This is a photo of the wharf, the remaining wharf, and what makes this picture is that there's rail lines going through there. So at one time, trains went through there, and the makeup of the wharf, we're going to get into more detail, but it's quite extensive. Okay. Oops, sorry. I'm really sorry. Going through...
Talk about a brief presentation here.
I probably should have operated it.
Okay, you're on.
A couple of things that are significant about this is, if you're unaware of, the operations in the wharf or in the port itself, it's one that from the get-go is going to involve multi-jurisdictions, multi-agencies. That in itself makes it what I would consider a very complex incident, one that of this significance can be somewhat of a cascading incident. So the need for command and control, communications, collaboration, and coordination with all the agencies is essential from the get-go. So one of the things that I felt worked was success points was some of the training that's ongoing there with our resources that are in the port along with some of the stakeholders, that being the Coast Guard, Long Beach Fire, LA Port Police, longshoremen, international workers, all the stakeholders there, because it's the ongoing training that's currently goes on, a lot of it that these fellows do, really made huge impacts initially. There was clearly, everyone was able to corral them early on and give everyone a common operating picture as to what was going on, what was burning, what was going on in terms of where the fire was going, and more importantly, what were the impacts, particularly with the smoke. There's large amounts of smoke initially on arrival.
This is what you saw.
This is a picture here of what was seen by one of the boats coming in, and as you can see, the impacts of smoke were significant. And at one point, they were operating in zero visibility in the marine side and the water side. As the incident early on needed a large number of resources, we had mutual aid almost immediately with Long Beach and ended up utilizing, I believe, 3 of their fire boats to assist us. Also, early on, it was recognized we had 2 large freighter ships that were impacted as exposures on both sides of the wooden wharf itself. If you can back up one to there, that's good. So this is an overview of the actual incident, and what you're looking at here is obviously off to the right is the water side and to the left is the land side. And what you're looking at in the middle there is actually a large warehouse building. It's approximately 100 by 800 plus feet in length. The fire itself originated right around the southern end of that, which is a wooden wharf. And the design of the port itself, you have a concrete seawall that runs not directly straight, it actually runs diagonal. and on top of that is several layers of heavy wood, heavy timber that make up the wooden wharf. That's another factor that complicated the extinguishment of this. On top of that, you have several layers of asphalt and even concrete, and then on top of that, you have the actual building itself. So part of the building, the warehouse, sits on land and also over on the water itself. The fire originated on the exterior and then ran the underside of the wooden wharf, which made it extremely difficult to actually get land resources first, and more importantly, even marine resources underneath to actually get a final extinguishment on the fire. The fire was organized, and what we did is organize it. We use a nomenclature of Alpha, Bravo, or A, B, Marine Division, in and around it to kind of organize the fire itself. So what you're looking at is the A, which is the northernmost. If you're thinking water out to sea being south, would be B, and A meaning going inland towards the city of Wilmington. Marine Division is charged basically to control all the water assets, and at one time I think we had an operating five plus water vessels out there operating both from firefighting and command and control, all during and zero visibility smoke conditions. On the land side, we had other number of significant issues that were identified. The port not only had high-power electrical that ran in and around underneath the deck or the wharf, we also had petroleum lines, some of which were inactive, others were active, so it clearly had to identify which ones those were and how they impacted the fire.
Right.
We had the significant smoke and the products of combustion that was enormous, so part of this is we addressed several factors, and of course there was the evacuation piece because of the plume of smoke that was making its way to inland in and around the surrounding communities. So with that, we organized it obviously from the firefighting efforts from the Marine Division, both the Alpha and Bravo section from the land side, also the hazardous materials group to do air monitoring to identify even the port workers, both on both sides of the port, both the eastern and westernmost side of it.
Can you explain the science behind the what triggered the plume of smoke with the wharf and the material at the wharf, the hazmat situation with it?
Right. The wooden material used to build the wharf was covered with a product of creosote, which is a petroleum-based product, and as that starts to burn, it puts off just an enormous amount of smoke, which is it's toxic smoke, and more smoke than if you can imagine burning rubber. So it's extremely dense, and with the conditions down there, the wind direction, it has tendency to move in multiple directions throughout the evening, and this was a long progressive fire, so the wind shifted several times. So at one point you had plume of smoke moving straight up, you had it moving southerly toward the city of Wilmington, you had it moving westerly towards the city of San Pedro, and of course easterly to impact the other bursts on the other side of the water itself. So knowing that, we actually started early on doing air monitoring to determine the toxicity of the smoke and then the conditions of it, and then identifying big picture in terms of areas to evacuate or to notify during the incident.
Thank you.
Getting back, real quick, sorry. Getting back to the construction of it, so the wooden wharf actually runs from the southernmost, where you see the letter B, where it kind of terminates, and it continues to run another 2,300 feet plus all the way around. The area where the fire originated and then ran was approximately about an 800-foot area. The southern area, what we consider would be a natural break because of the termination of the wharf itself. We used as a natural break, and of course, as we get into the tactics and strategy of this, we used on the northern area a method that we've used in a lot of our traditional structural firefighting we employed during this.
Can I ask you a quick question? Yes, Mr. O'Farrell. Chief Gutierrez, so back to that one slide, if you don't mind. So
Yes.
how far to the left does the creosote wood structure go before it becomes land?
From the southernmost side, it runs approximately 30 feet underneath the building.
Okay, 30.
And then there's a seawall, which is concrete, that runs diagonal, not necessarily straight, it runs diagonal, so it starts to diminish as it moves forward. I think approximately another 20 feet towards the northernmost end of the building itself. So as you can imagine, the structure fits, again, it's over the water, partially on wood, partially on asphalt, partially on concrete. Then, as it moves inland, off the water, partially on concrete, partially on asphalt. So it's really one of those, again, complicated, more complex that we had to really think about, okay, what are some of the tactics we can employ and determine the structural integrity of the building and some of the overall safety aspects of it. The initial actions were, aggressively attacking the fire using our fireboats, and maybe if I can have Captain Reyna.
Captain Reyna, I got the best job in the fire department. I get to ride one of those large boats. Yes. Our first plan was to attack it with the boats, put as much water as we possibly could. We have this thing, and we'll talk about them, they're called underwharfs. Actually, it's kind of a line of defense. We try to draw a line in the sand and say, okay, we're going to hold it right here. But as you all know, like in brush firefighting, we set up lines. Sometimes they get beyond it, and this was one of those where it's just difficult to get to. Needed a lot more water than we could put on it. Our boats are different in style. One's built 50 years ago, and one's 2000. The new boat is able to put out about 38,000 gallons a minute versus 9,000.
Still, it's one of the most powerful fire boats in the world.
Correct. Yes, that's why I say it's the best
Great
job.
Resource, right?
Yeah,
Amazing
very
resource.
happy to be there.
Unified Command.
The Unified Command piece, that was early on in the incident, almost from the get-go upon my arrival, started to get all the stakeholders together, and again, once developing a common operating picture, as well as clear incident objectives, control measures, which impacted the incident as well as the surrounding communities. The initial objectives were first safety of the public and responders, getting a clear message out in terms of what was burning, what was the smoke conditions, and where it was going through the media, minimizing the impact of the environment. Again, there was debris and runoff into the channel itself. That was early on. We made a determination to put down booms to contain that. Also, managing our agency response. That was part of the business continuity piece that went with that. Clearly knowing that the longshoremen are operating, they're working on loading cargo, is how do we mitigate the incident and coordinate it so that we're not clearly stopping operations within the port. Contain the fire to the berth itself, protect the warehouse and its contents. Obviously being cognizant of, once again, the safety that goes along with that. The picture that you've seen earlier on about those showed the large steel drums. There was significant weight inside the warehouse, and that was the products that warehouse contained in storage. The downwind conditions, constant monitoring of that, and creating a maritime safety zone. We were able to work through Coast Guard and through the Marine Exchange to identify where all the boats that were coming into port, who was in port, and how to navigate clearly in and around the incident, throughout the incident. Strategy and tactics. If you look back, and we kind of looked at this historically, these fires have burned for a significant period of time. In Seattle, New York, and I think in other parts of the country, traditionally these fires have burned for as long as weeks. And a lot of that is due to the construction, and we'll get into the construction in a minute, as well as access to it, and of course the resource and capabilities of the fire department in and around where the fire originates. The fire was clearly developed upon the initial on-scene responders once they got on scene, and the initial attempts to extinguish it, both with the divers and fire boats, were early on unsuccessful. If you want to talk real quick about the dive operation.
We put our divers in, they have this thing called underwharfs. They're actually floats with fire department nozzles on them. They put out about 500 gallon. While the wharf is burning, they swim out under the wharf, and I'll use this table as if we want to stop the fire at this break here, they take these underwharfs, swim under the wharf, and then attach them to the wharf, and then swim out, and then we charge them with water. And puts about 2,000 gallons of water as kind of a fire curtain for say. Our first plan with Boat 4 got overrun. We just didn't have enough water to hold it. Boat 2 was set at the very other end to protect that ship that we saw early on. That ship was our number one priority because it was the closest exposure other than the building. So
how when Chief Terrazas was explaining to me the underwharf, how safe is that for fire? My first thought, oh my God, they're going to get killed down there.
Well, we try to put them out in front of the fire, and this is where a little bit of experience, a little bit of maybe luck come involved, where we say, We're going to put them over here a little ways away from the fire. Of course, we don't want to give up a mile, so we're going to put them about 200 feet, and so that it's a little safer, but it's dangerous work.
Right.
There's no getting around it. It's just dangerous work.
And even with the environment, they had all the protective gear.
And talking to the divers, normally they go on air when they get in the water, and they were on air sitting on the boat.
Right.
Because the smoke was so bad, they felt like, I'd rather be on air sitting on this boat than sitting in the environment they were, because they couldn't breathe.
And last up, Pete, boat number 4, that's, how old is that boat? Because I understand that wasn't...
51 years old.
That wasn't effective during this fire. I mean, it helped, but 51 years old.
51 years old, and it is old.
So would you recommend it's time to upgrade the boat 4?
It's time, sir. It's a great operating boat still, but 51 years old, and like Captain Reyna talked about, the power is not there. 9,000
Right.
compared to his boat, 39,000. It's quite a difference.
Maybe that's a budget item moving forward, looking the next fiscal year.
Be
Okay.
great, yes. This is a photo of actually the divers in the water early on. And they, that yellow, sorry for the blurry photo, but that yellow thing, and we have a better photo later on, that's the underwharf nozzle. And then this is them working off the small boats. And this is what Captain Reyna was talking about regarding the underwharf nozzles. Those things, each of them will pump out 500 gallons per minute. Now, they have to be taken in there by the divers and then tied off to the wharf. And then once you do that, now you've anchored one side. You do that to the other side, you anchor the other side, then you put the fire out.
Mr. O'Farrell made a good point. If you look, the close proximity of these tanks, these are above-ground tanks, was that a concern throughout the operation?
We back to the original large photo, we were concerned of those tanks because obviously they carry petroleum, but we were monitoring. There wasn't any embers going over there, so, but we knew they were there.
Given the environment, this could have been more catastrophic. Amazing work done by all levels.
Part of the difficult issue that Chief Gutierrez was talking about, this is actually the building inside, and as you can see, the building sits over the wharf. That answers your question earlier. The building sits over the water, over the wharf. Initially, the firefighters entered that one door, and they were confronted with fire. So they had to back to another larger door and then enter that way. So, and it's difficult to put a fire out like this because basically the fire's underneath them. Very, very difficult for them to get underneath and put that fire out. That just shows you, and this is another photo of the ship that was an exposure that was moved early on with cooperation of the Port Police and Coast Guard. I want to talk about wharf makeup.
Right. And getting back to the historical perspective on this in terms of wharf fires, one of the reasons that if you look historically at these fires throughout the country, if not the world, is first of all, they're built a long time ago. I mean, you're talking back in early 1900s. And the construction, it changed over time. This is clearly heavy timber, anywhere from 12 to 24, 18 by 24 beams. And they're not built in a systematic way. It's kind of any which way you can think, as well as the depth of it. So along with that, it's complicated with, you have a wooden structure that's supported by wooden beams, that's heavy timber, set in a matrix that's really not one that's very conventional. And on top of that, you have, over time, layers of asphalt, multiple layers of asphalt, railroad tracks, and even concrete. So it's one of those things that, again, in my experience, and it's close to 30 years, you had to really think, okay, so what is it, and how are we going to control this? How are we going to establish, really clearly control objectives that are measurable, that we can extinguish this? So thinking outside the box, we used a number of things, from heavy equipment, through the Harbor Department, through our USAR companies coming in and using jackhammers from the top side, to our members operating in extreme conditions in smoke with chainsaws and hand equipment for over an hour to cut what we call like a trench or a strip to actually stop the fire's progression to the north. So here's some pictures of some of the beams and some of the construction aspects of it. And of course, mind you, they're operating in some of that bad smoke on self-contained breathing apparatus. One of the things I'd like to point out on this is you can obviously look at, it's kind of hard to see there, but you see the large boat there, you see the fire, you see the debris from where the area that we cut into the port itself. But the smoke conditions, one of the other significant differences between Boat 4 and Boat 2 is the ability to operate in the pilot house or wheelhouse, and I'll let Captain Moreno address that.
I'm sorry, I was talking to this gentleman.
That's okay.
The bridge
The-
on Boat
the-
2 compared to Boat 4.
The difference between Boat 4 and Boat 2 is I was able to sit there very comfortably, talk on the radio, and every time I talked to Boat 4, because of their pilot house, does not have the scrubber system that we have. It's just like a big, almost like a paint booth. We're inside it, and the air runs through filters. Boat 4 doesn't
Sure.
have that, being
Right.
50 years old. So they were actually wearing their SCBAs, trying to operate their boat while they had this big, heavy item on their back, where in my vessel, I didn't have to have any of that. And he was asking us to close it up.
Okay.
Thank you.
And there's just an overview of the pictures there. We'll go to the next slide.
Very good.
Another overview. And there's landside.
We tried a number of ways, including high expansion foam and regular foam.
Right, I remember that.
To get the fire out. One of the other things about Boat 2, and it has,
We have, all our fireboats have AIS, all the commercial vessels in the harbor have AIS, so we can watch each other. This became critical when we were operating and they started moving large vessels with tugboats. We have the FLIR on Boat 2, and what you're looking at is the dock during the daytime. The white area is reflection of the sun, that's why it's white. The dock area is on top in dark. There's some plywood underneath, so you can kind of see the difference. This is how we were driving Boat 2. Boat 4 was driving by feel. They were just bumping into things, trying to drive where we could actually see. They were
Definitely need to upgrade our fleet.
I would, yes.
And the reason being is because, as you know, the Port of Los Angeles is the economic engine for this, not only region, but for this country. And whenever there's a threat of shutting down port operation, that's each day, I was told, it's $1 billion a day of our national economy. And this could have been a lot worse. I just really commend your work. The technology that was used, the partnerships at Unified Command, and the training that takes place each and every day in preparation for incidents like this.
Right. I would characterize it this was a significant incident, but not one that was catastrophic. There are a number of challenges in and around the waterfront, from heavy mechanized equipment to freighters to hazardous materials to a number of things. Of course, human life operating on there 24/7, unloading cargo, that you're going to have something catastrophic. So this is significant. There's a number of lessons learned from this. I think we've identified, obviously the need for some improved, not only technology, some innovation in other areas, some strategy and tactics on our ends and resource needs. But overall, it went well. Now is to take this and use it as a springboard and look at all these things. The upgrades to the new boat, upgrades to some of the equipment needs in terms of divers.
Upgrade of our wharfs as well. I mean,
Absolutely.
we're using technology, new engineering, as well as we continue to expand
Yes.
and not only grow our port, but green our port as well. One concern I did have throughout the entire operation was this screen here. The question was evacuate or not to evacuate, specifically with our kids. I know we used the reverse 911 system, but I think parents, including myself as a father of two LA Unified School District students, we were, torn whether to send the kids into school or not. I just would have preferred to see a better response in collaboration with the school district.
Yes.
Right, the message was shelter-in-place message was sent out.
Right.
So how long did the final, as far as the total time it took for final extinguishment, what was the hours?
The total extinguishment was about 23 hours overall, which is, again, historically a huge success.
Right. I think 10, 20 years ago, That thing may have still been going on.
No, it would have, yeah.
Or at least not, but at least extended.
We believe the benefit of having a new boat, Boat 2,
Right.
really stopped
Right.
this. Early on, that fire just started running. It was off to the races.
Most of the extinguishment was done in about 23 hours. The final extinguishment was done with Harbor's assistance, especially getting this crane. And as you can see, made quick work of the overhaul pile and able to get most of the embers that were still burning underneath the wharf. And of course, like Chief Gutierrez talked about, Unified Command, and you can see Chief Terrazas there, yourself, the mayor, port police, of course, and then the captain of the port. They were together during the incident, and they made the press conference together. And then again, the last slide.
Thank you so much for your dedication, continued commitment to overall public safety, not only our port, but the entire city of Los Angeles. And also want to thank Gene Soroke, our port director, for being on the ground as well and directing his team during the response efforts. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So with this item, yes, we'll send this to council and as a note and file.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 13.
Item 13, motion of Farrell Englander directing the LAPD with the assistance of the Human Relations Commission and in consultation with the Department of Homeland Security and the Muslim Public Affairs Council to report on its countering violent extremism efforts and the Safe Spaces Initiative.
Thank you. I will turn this over to the maker of the motion, Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have joining us today Chief Michael Downing. We have Haroon Hazar, U.S. Department of Homeland Security. We also have Salam Al-Maradi, sorry about that, Muslim Public Affairs Committee. And then we have Jumana Silyan Saba of LA Human Relations Commission. And we know that violent extremism is a real challenge in this post-9/11 world we live in, and we've seen evidence of it, sadly, in certain spots across the country and across the world, certainly. So we know that the city is working with the White House, actually, and is serving as a model for how to engage the community to combat any risk of extremism ahead of time and to help make Los Angeles, the environment, safer and free from that environment. So well, we have a report today on all of the great work that is being done by these fine people. So they're going to report on the update of the motion that I introduced a couple of months ago, and then talk about next steps. And there's something very important happening in a couple of months, I understand, from the Office of President Obama, and so we'd like to hear all of this.
Maybe I'll start and then
Sure.
we can just kind of go down the line. So, well, thank you for recognizing this. I mean, I don't think there has been a more relevant time in our history where this type of approach and this type of work, it's never been this important because of what we're seeing in the Middle East, because of the record numbers of foreign fighters from all over the world pouring into the Middle East to support and side with Daesh, which is also a term known for the Islamic State in the Levant. But what it really means is, as the Secretary said yesterday, it has nothing to do with Islam and it has nothing to do with the state. It is bigotry, opposed views on other people. And so the work that we have done from the community policing side, it's really an enhanced form of community policing in terms of working with communities that may be on the fringe, that may not be integrated, that don't have trust because of countries that they came from where they don't believe in government and they don't believe in law enforcement. And I think we've been working in this area since about 2008. But over time, we've been able to step back and move away from a securitized relationship and encourage civic engagement, help facilitate problem-solving skills, help facilitate on how to improve the quality of life in communities, and really be a partner and have a voice in government to find ways to integrate communities, individuals, to support the values of our country, and to create a bigger gap between the hardcore violent radicals and those that are supporting healthy, resilient communities. The idea of our approach has been, it's certainly not an inoculation against violent extremism, but it has been a prescription to build healthy, resilient communities where everybody participates. And if the Constitution is our greatest shield, our greatest strength is our people. And that's all the people in the community, all the diverse people in the community. And I think we've seen one of the great aspects of this model is partnership. Partnership with Muslim communities, with Muslim community leadership organizations, with the Department of Homeland Security, Human Relations Commission, and certainly your office, Councilman. Harut has been a great partner to us in recognizing, one, how fragile this issue is, but also that it does need government support, government leadership, and the idea of executive sponsorship. And I think now what we're seeing is empowering, enabling communities to get involved in civic engagement where they actually contribute and they're supported by law enforcement and the federal government.
If I can we take the conversations outside, please, so we can listen to the presentation? Thank you, Sergeant.
I'm just trying to inquire why we're not allowed to make a public comment right now when they're allowed to present, when we're also part of
Okay, we'll explain. Sergeant Arms will explain, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, then I'll get my stuff. I will get my stuff. But it's just very unfair that the public is being silenced right now. And this is not acceptable that representatives of our city, because they don't show up to do their job, that now we're being silenced.
Feel free to fill out a public comment card on a non-agenda item, ma'am.
I filled out.
We already have.
Comment card. Filled it out on item 1 as well.
Okay, we already explained that we don't have a quorum here.
So I don't see why they're being allowed to.
Okay, the Sergeant of Arms will be more than happy to explain that, ma'am.
So now you're having police officers
Thank you.
put me out because I'm a citizen and not being allowed to speak.
Thank you.
I want to know, are you guys voting on this as well?
You can speak on the item when it comes to council. Okay, ma'am?
Okay. So
Thank you.
very unfair and very
We'll give you that date. In fact, when are we going to hear that item in council?
Which one?
Item, I believe they want to speak on item number 1.
It'll be the week of November 24th, either Tuesday or Wednesday. No date's been set.
Okay, November 24th.
You can contact me for the date.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry for the interruption. Proceed.
Thank you for inviting us, Mr. Chairman and Councilman O'Farrell. And I think the two issues that we are dealing with, number one, is in the post-9/11 era, our job is to prevent acts of terrorism, not just to have law enforcement investigate and incarcerate and convict after the incident. And that is quite a daunting task. And therefore, it requires partnership. Law enforcement cannot do it on its own, and communities cannot do it on their own. We need that partnership. The second issue, then, is the issue of civil liberties. How do we do that while preserving the civil liberties of the public and of these communities that we're engaging on these issues? And that is why we have a community-driven project called the Safe Spaces Initiative. The Safe Spaces Initiative is basically based on the model of Father Gregory Boyle in preventing gang violence. And in a microcosm, what we're dealing with here in terms of CVE is trying to prevent young people from being lured into being involved in international gang movements. ISIS is not any religious group. It is basically a mafia that is trying to lure young kids to do nefarious acts in the name of a state or in the name of a people or in the name of a faith. And we have to expose that fallacy. And the Safe Spaces Initiative does that in a 3-tier method. The first is prevention, and prevention is through strong Islamic education of young people, of converts who come to the religion, that if if they believe that they're doing something in the name of the religion, they should understand what that means and not to be fooled by the lies of groups like ISIS, who just send young people to death while their leaders sit on thrones of self-righteousness. The second part of prevention is civic engagement, and I think Chief Downing explained that very well, to promote more civic engagement within our communities. And the third is to be able to talk about these hot topic issues, international events, what's happening here in terms of anti-Muslim hysteria. How do we deal with civil liberties in our society? To do that within the communities. Then we go into intervention. Intervention basically requires a crisis inquiry team when we detect there's somebody who is troubled. And this is community driven. The community needs mental health experts, social service workers, more peer counselors. It can't rely on the one religious leader of a mosque to do everything. It needs a team, it needs the support of the rest of society in dealing with these issues, and it needs effective means of intervention. And to determine, is this person, are we able to rehabilitate that person or not? We should rehabilitate our way out of this problem. We cannot incarcerate our way out of this problem. If Tamerlan Tsarnaev, the Boston Marathon bomber, was intervened with early on, maybe we could have prevented the Boston Marathon attack. That's what we're hoping for in the future here. Then the third is ejection. So it's prevention, intervention, and then when we feel that this person is on that ramp of violent extremism, we can't deal with that person. We hand him over to law enforcement and say, we can't deal with the situation. Our job is theology, social interaction, peer support, and rehabilitation. The job of law enforcement is criminal investigation. So the crisis inquiry team works with law enforcement when it gets to the point of ejection. And I think, as you said, this is a model that is being looked upon by the federal government. In fact, the federal government's model is not prevention, intervention, ejection. Its model is prevention, intervention, interdiction. So it's very similar.
Right. Thank you.
Good morning, Council. It's an honor to be here. From a federal perspective, I know you guys alluded to, hopefully I can fill in some of the gaps on, what's going on from Washington and how we see this effort evolving. So back in 2011, the White House, in close collaboration with local partners, both from communities and law enforcement groups, published a strategy entitled Empowering Local Communities to Prevent Violent Extremism Around the United States. And if you look inside that strategy and its subsequent implementation plan, you see that the key themes from it are communities, communities, local, local. We understand that, we say often Homeland Security begins with hometown security, and we fully understand that. And so we took it upon ourselves to work with our local partners, some you see here, in developing that strategy. Now, fast forward now until recently, the White House did a survey around the country as to where do we see positive engagement and initiatives around this issue. And 3 cities were selected as having very good programs, very good engagement initiatives between community groups and law enforcement. The 3 cities are Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Boston, and then Los Angeles. And so this isn't a new program per se, but it's just a recognition by the federal government of activities happening here locally and the work these individuals on either side of me are doing together collaboratively with the community. And so this is going to culminate in a summit at the White House in the near future, whereby representatives from all of these 3 cities, and when I say representative, I'm talking communities, law enforcement, social services. So really a whole of community will come to Washington and represent and give a snapshot to the country and to the executives in our government of what's going on in these cities. And the idea is for us to produce a best practice, basically a recipe for other cities and tell them, how some of these programs are happening in these cities. And so the role of government as my colleagues have said, in this issue, I mean, we understand that this needs to be a community-driven effort. Government should not and never will be in the business of thought police. I mean, we are not telling people how to think. We are not telling people what to think. We are not branding, good versus bad. I think that will take care of itself in the marketplace of ideas, and it's properly situated to be led by communities. And so, what do we do as a government, as a federal government and local government? We provide access. We provide empowerment by, yesterday, Secretary of Homeland Security, and for the next few days, he's actually in town, and we held a forum at a mosque in LA County, St. Gabriel Valley. We had 2 open forums for the community where that we can discuss solutions to not only this problem, but other issues related to our homeland security. And so we are very committed to ensuring that community voices are heard in this effort. We're very cognizant of the fact of, civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy issues are part of this discussion every step of the way. Sure. We have 2, specifically from DHS, we have 2 upcoming programs that are going to be, again, surrounding these issues. One thing we offer communities is a community resilience exercise. And this is again, these are all exercises to build trust within communities. And what we do in that exercise is we go through a real-life scenario with law enforcement. Half the room is filled with law enforcement, half the room is filled with community groups, but we reverse the roles. And so we are invested in efforts that will build that trust, that will bring people together around the table so we can discuss this very challenging issue. So, I mean, in addition to that, the other thing we provide with our partners here is threat briefing. We have a lot of communities who are like, what is the threat? We see the news, we don't know what's going on, and so we make it a part of our job to provide that service for communities, for law enforcement, and for others. And so efforts like these where, which encourages collaboration at the local level, which involves, city council, local governments to help us in this effort are welcomed, and we recognize the importance of your role in this effort.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. So I'm going to have to bring this back to the ground level. Over the past 5 to 6 years or so, we've been working very closely, primarily with Muslim, Arab, Sikh communities. Much of that work has really been focused on addressing areas of bias and hate, but to a broader extent to bolster civic participation and civic engagement in these communities. One of the challenges that we're up against right now is expanding how we understand violent extremism. We need to be able to understand that beyond law enforcement, and we need to be able to expand the understanding in a social perspective. And I think when we expand that understanding, then we can expand our creative approaches. Working with communities over the past several years and partnering with various grassroots organizations, including MPAC, and the programs that they're presenting, we see those as viable programs because they come from the community, they specifically address the community, and they more understand where the needs are than anyone else. So we see our role more so in supporting those efforts and bringing those efforts forward. The other thing that the Commission has been really keen on is understanding that widening gaps of exclusion and hateful language feeds into the narrative of extremists. So the more we are able to promote a pluralistic society using those building blocks of civic participation, the more we are able to protect our communities, but to also create a healthy narrative for our people in LA. For our city, most diverse in the world, we hosted Councilmember O'Farrell hosted the Armenian bishop from Syria not too long ago, and he spoke of the atrocities. Here, we speak of pluralism as our core value, and that's what we want to shine for the rest of the world. So this is how we counter those ideologies. It's through promoting those values. So in working with City Council, what we're really hoping to do in the ask is that we continue to promote policies that are going to empower communities and policies that are going to specifically invest in communities. This is where we see some of the lack. While we're working with grassroots organizations, some of these organizations lack the capacity. And so what we really need to do is invest in communities, invest in capacity building, so that we can have a meaningful civic participation and a meaningful civic engagement. Through the work of our commission, we have included these communities in a variety of issues, from areas that pertain to bias and bullying, youth and leadership participation. We've had several youth on our youth programs that participated and actually went to Washington with our group. And so we, to the extent possible, incorporate and include these communities in a variety of programs. But we're here to ask that we need to do more. We need to do more at a grassroots level. We need to do more at a city council level, at a district level, because our communities are broad. And everywhere in the city we go, we have some of the largest diaspora communities anywhere in the world. We do have some of the largest Muslim community. We have some of the second largest Syrian communities in the country. So our communities are here, and we need to be able to include them so that we are not facing that narrative where they're being put in a negative light and labeled and framed in a negative way. So working together collectively, and this has really been the strength of LA. This is why LA has been selected as a model. It is communities, it is the strength of our partnerships, and this is what we're asking you to support as we continue to move forward. Thank you.
Terrific. Let me just say, Jamal, I think that you said it best in the sense that we are the most diverse city in the world. And I think that, the cliche that our diversity is our strength, it's more than a cliche. It's something that we should completely own. And I think that what the four of you are reporting on and the work that you're doing really sets the standard for not just the city, but for the rest of the country. We have a golden opportunity to really set that high level of standard and interaction with our communities so that we can continue to serve as a model for the rest of the world on this very nuanced, complicated, multi-layered issue. And I think we're really, for all practical purposes, getting ahead of the game here in a really good way. And I think that you've helped set the tone for that. So I want to thank you for all your work on this. It's of vital importance. It's also one of those things that probably won't get talked about a lot, but the results will be that we're a safer, more enlightened city with safer neighborhoods, more enlightened populations that live in harmony, greater harmony, and that's the mission here. And those are the kinds of things that don't get reported about a whole lot. So it really is investing in people, investing in the diversity that we have here, and really letting that be the guiding light forward. So with that, I have a few questions that I've kind of narrowed down, and that is in terms of Chief Downing, let me ask you, what role do you see in, for example, our senior lead officers, the officers that have the greatest touch in our communities? What role do you see them playing?
Well, we have specialists in our liaison section who are standing behind me that represent the diversity of our community that we serve. And I think the idea here is to try to institutionalize this idea throughout the rank and file and throughout the community so that there is no area where officers are uncomfortable going into. There's nowhere where they are hesitant to develop a relationship. And I think that that's a finesseful thing. It's not your traditional community policing approach. It's understanding the backgrounds, the culture, the tradition, the drivers, where these communities are getting their news. Sometimes it's not CNN and Channel 2 and Channel 4. Sometimes it's niche markets, it's newspapers, it's BBC. And sometimes they have families that live in these war zones that they feel these grievances and this discontent. So if we can address that, that's great. I would also just like to comment that I think this is a big move for the City Council. I think your leadership and this executive sponsorship that you've shown to this issue demonstrates your understanding that we are in a new world and that our communities are our strength and that diversity is a strength of this area. And I think you're exactly right. If we can get this right and we can show buy-in from both the political infrastructure, from public safety, from fire, from NGOs, from the federal government, if we can show that, we could develop a model that could be exportable and scalable to any city in this country. And I'd just like to thank you for your leadership in recognizing that.
My complete pleasure in this. It's something that we've all been thinking about, especially since, for 13 years now, since 9/11 occurred. One of the key factors when you hear about the lone wolf sort of who's been indoctrinated, sometimes it's not even a human that indoctrinates them. It's hours and hours and hours on the internet, and they then become this, homegrown, isolated, disenfranchised individual who decides to engage in a terrorist act, him or herself, and that is not attached to any one religion or any one belief. Sometimes it's attached to no belief. So, I would imagine, as a layman, just that the interaction of all the communities could help identify individuals that someone might know who might be at risk for kind of going in that direction. And that serves an incredible purpose as well. And I have a question that's kind of a practical question. In terms of the high-profile locations across the city, whether it's the port, whether it's Venice, whether it's Universal City, Hollywood, you name it, we have what would be called soft targets. I know that in New York, for example, they closed part of Times Square permanently to vehicular traffic. I think my feeling is that within the context of this conversation, it's premature to start talking in that direction. However, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I think the worst thing that we can do is put up bars and razor wire and close off public access to things because it's admitting weakness, and we're not weak. I think there is a reality that we have to protect against, and we do look at shoring up those hard targets. We look at protecting our critical infrastructure. We just met last week. We had a meeting with all the private security heads throughout the whole city that represent 22,000 private security guards, as well as Jewish leadership throughout the entire community, and we have one scheduled with Muslim communities as well. But I think that's our strength, and I think if we look at closing off things, the threats don't indicate that now. We don't have a credible threat in LA, but we do have an environment that is luring young people into this dysfunctional ideology, and that's something that we can fight against. This isn't a Muslim problem, it's not a Jewish problem, and it's not a Christian problem. It's a real human problem. And I think one of the great strengths we have as well in this region is our interfaith. And the interfaith in this community, in this region, is so strong, and they come together whenever asked to push back against this. So we do have that leadership. I think parents have to understand that this type of threat we're dealing with is real and current, and that they have a role as well. And all Americans have a role now. This is a different world. It's not a time to be anxious or over paranoid, but it is a time to ask, how do we participate? How do we get involved? How do we step up to the plate and be a partner in this to make sure that we have a safe neighborhood, community, city, and country?
Terrific. And one more question, Mr. Chair. To Mr. Al-Marayati, can you expand on the Safe Places Initiative? Just explain that a little further.
The Safe Spaces Initiative is designed to preserve the spiritual sanctity of the mosque and also to empower communities to address this problem of violent extremism. In other words, we're going from a partnership, we're going from a model where there may have been surveillance of communities, such as in New York, we had that situation, and we're pushing it towards a model of partnership, where we rely on our greatest asset, and that is the community. And as you said correctly, Councilman, it's not, the problem may not be happening in the mosque or in a house of worship, it's happening in somebody's bedroom, on the internet, on their cell phone. But we can use our mosques as assets in being the people who go and intervene in situations with compassion. And that can only be done with the support of the American people. There is obviously a major challenge in the environment, the narrative that Jumana was talking about, on so many sides. And we have to create our own narrative in that way. I have to say that Los Angeles is leading. I would say more than leading the country, it's leading the world. Because in Europe, they don't have these models. Because simply, America has that open society of pluralism. It has that acceptance. There is a higher rate of Muslim professionals living in the United States than anywhere in the world. A higher educated class, a group that wants to be civically engaged. So we need to use that asset. So the Safe Spaces program is leveraging these assets so that we can empower communities to do three things: prevent, intervene, and then in the case of somebody who is a lost soul going down that path of violent extremism, eject in partnership with law enforcement. So that's called the PI model. Basically, that's what Safe Spaces is. It's the PI model.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good. Yeah. Thank you so much for your presentation. With this item, we will send to council as a note and file.
Thanks, sir.
And sir,
unless you want to add anything.
If we could continue this for
You want to continue it?
because I would love a report back once the White House participation function occurs.
Yes.
What are we calling that? What's the event?
It's a White House Summit.
The summit. Thank you.
Okay.
That's a very simple word. The summit.
When do you want to hear this again?
Once after the summit occurs, and a report back on that.
After the New Year's, probably.
Want to do 60 days, 90 days?
Please.
Okay.
Very good.
We'll do that. That'll be the order. Thank you so
very
much.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Item 14.
Item 14 it is.
Communications from the City Attorney and Ordinance amending Section 55.11 of the LAMC to require ammunition vendors to electronically transmit all records of ammunition transactions to the LAPD.
So this item was held here in Public Safety and continued. We wanted to get a report back on how many ammunition vendors are in the city, the fiscal impacts, and ultimately the outreach plan, community outreach plan. Did I mention the fiscal impact as well? So if we can get that report, we'd appreciate it. And who's going to start?
Good morning. Heather Aubrey, Deputy City Attorney.
Thank you.
I drafted the draft ordinance for your consideration regarding the, I believe you're asking about the pilot program.
Right.
I will defer to the department on that.
Very good.
Yes, we had a pilot program at Turner Outdoorsman in the Valley. Went very successful. We found a couple of items that needed to be tweaked with their insight, made those changes, and incorporated that into the existing ammo log. So we are ready to go with this.
So you're ready to mobilize. So just a couple hiccups in the pilot program, and that's been solidified. It's fine. It's been fixed. Okay. Any other comments, recommendations, concerns on this?
I think the only other question, Maggie Goodrich, CIO for LAPD, I think the only other question the last time this was heard in public safety was just, we were asked for a little more description around the technology, and so I thought I would just describe that very briefly. So you
Please do, thank you.
It's a very simple system. It's essentially an electronic form that you can access on lapdonline.org. As G&D goes out to roll this out, my staff will be available to go with them and assist them. Essentially, we'll make the form available online. We'll install a shortcut on the desktop of the computers in the actual stores. And they click on it, they fill it out. I think you were given an exemplar. I handed one to the clerk. There's a button at the top right of the screen that says email submit. Once they fill out the form, they hit that button. It launches their email client and sends the form to us at LAPD.
What happens if they don't comply? If the business doesn't comply?
What was the question?
What happens if the business does not comply with this?
As per the ordinance, they'll have to comply. We have 16 gun stores in the city of Los Angeles, not a huge amount.
Will they get fined if they don't fill out the form?
Violation of the ordinance is a misdemeanor.
Misdemeanor.
As is violation of most city ordinances. So yes, they would be subject to the penalties associated with the misdemeanor violation.
Very good.
I have a quick question.
Mr.
What
O'Farrell.
would lead the city to just yank their permits if they didn't comply? What kind of room do they have to to navigate within that after getting a notice to comply? If they just refuse, what's the end game?
Well, as a misdemeanor, and we have a really good relationship with the gun stores. They see our investigators quite regularly as we go out to inspect them. We don't anticipate any problems, but it would be a misdemeanor in the same context for the public, that if someone is committing a minor offense, we would write them a ticket and they would have to appear in court. And then either get a fine or probation or something like that. But we have a really good relationship with them. They really bend over backwards in general to try and comply, because there are many rules that they have to adhere to in order to operate the business.
Okay. And I also understand there were some legal concerns, and the court has ruled that this is justified and legal, right?
Yes, just to briefly update you regarding the legal landscape at this point. There was a Court of Appeal decision that basically ruled that a state law regarding ammunition vendors is void for vagueness. That decision is now under consideration by the California Supreme Court, but that relates to state law. It doesn't have a direct bearing on this ordinance before you.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
You okay with moving this forward?
Definitely.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we'll be the direction of this committee to move this to council. Thank you so much for your presentation. Okay, item 15.
Item 15, motion Fuentes Martinez Englander relative to requesting the city attorney with the participation of LAPD to report on the status of the recent U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling in the case of Patel versus the City of Los Angeles.
Thank you. Welcome. This, for me personally, I struggled with this ruling, and I was disappointed by the court's ruling on this. As a senior lead officer, I use this as a tool on a number of probation checks at our local hotspot motels, hotels, and just wanted to, my question, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. O'Farrell, was how is this ruling going to impact LAPD's enforcement moving forward, specifically when it comes to parole probation checks?
We have good news. The United States Supreme Court has accepted our petition for certiorari, meaning that before this term is over, we have we think, a reasonable chance of having the Ninth Circuit's opinion declaring this ordinance facially unconstitutional, reversed, and remanded. So we're still in the game.
Okay, you're still, okay, got it. Okay. Anyone else?
Specifically, you were asking about probation and parole checks, how it impacts us, and in order to be able to do that without having the ability to check the registry.
Yes.
I'm here today with Detective Moore from DSPD, our Vice Division. I'd like him to speak to that issue.
Yeah, you know, the original design of the ordinance is really to identify who's staying at the motels, and the primary reason for that is really to create less enticement for criminals to easily move their operations or conceal, victims. One of the bigger uses of bigger than probation and parole would actually be the rescue of human trafficking victims, and the hardening of the target for a lot of the motels. Some of the motels that do not comply with 4149 are really magnets for criminal activity in the community. I've got one location where there are 72 citizens' declarations articulating the spillover crimes such as robberies, rapes, fighting, gang activity, narcotics. So it's bigger than just the probation and parole searches, although those are a nice component. But the real design is really containment and prevention and collaboration. It was mentioned earlier that, it takes a community effort to mitigate crime. Well, it's an essential partnership with the hotels that they fill out these cards and that we work together, because without it, it makes it very easy to avoid arrest and move criminal operations.
Got it. So knowing that there's another shot at this in the appeals process, what would be your recommendation, to continue this and wait to hear the results?
I'd recommend continuing it. We expect the argument before the Supreme Court this spring. The decision should issue probably in June.
Okay. So let's recommend that. Doug, Councilman Englander would be okay with that? Just continue holding this in committee until we get more feedback from the court's rulings. let's continue this and with the report back in 60 days.
Very good.
Okay?
Thank you.
Then we'll just continue. Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, we are going to reconsider item 1. There are a couple of folks who are here and are passionate about this, as we heard earlier. So we'll just continue, reconsider item 1, Mr. O'Farrell, if you're okay with that. Okay. For those who want to speak, and I have 4 speaker cards, and let's bring up Alani Bonilla, please, followed by Jamie Garcia and Elizabeth Thornton. And Herman on item 1. So Alani Bonilla, please, come forward.
Alani's not here.
Okay. Okay, Jamie Garcia.
How much time? How much time each?
2 minutes. 2 minutes to speak on the item.
You guys hearing? I'm a night nurse in Boyle Heights, so
Thank you for your
I work
service.
tonight, so I came here at 8:30 in order to make a comment so I can get back to sleep and work tonight.
Okay, can you restart her time, please?
Sure.
Yes,
Thank
sir, I'm going. And I'm a registered nurse in Boyle Heights and a member of the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. So in a report written by Senator Tom Coburn, a conservative Republican from Oklahoma, entitled Safety at Any Price, and I quote, exposes misguided and wasteful spending in one of the largest terror prevention grant programs at the Department of Homeland Security called the Urban Area Security Initiative. Senator Coburn proposes evidence that demonstrates the UASI program's failing at accomplishing its goals despite receiving $7.1 billion in federal funding over a period of 9 years, funding specifically for Los Angeles and Long Beach between the fiscal years of 2003 to 2012. It was a little more than $64 million, and today we are seeing a communication from Mayor Garcetti for an additional grant funding of a total of $56 million over a 2-year period. Considering that LAPD already receives 55% of the city's unrestricted budget, we see that this is a large amount of money being given to an institution with already bloated monies. So Senator Coburn continues to point out that over this 10-year period that the Urban Area Grant Program would change from a risk-based program into an entitlement program for cities and states. This program, the Urban Area Security Initiative, was the same program which paid for the Dragonflyer X6 drones purchased by Seattle, which currently are in possession of the Inspector General of LAPD. We reject how these monies are being used to militarize LAPD and this continued waste of resources being given to an institution, as I said before, with a bloated budget. So seeing that these fundings could possibly be taken from cities and states, what we see is the opportunity for resources to be stripped from other institutions. And this is something that we really need to consider, seeing that our senators are already speaking out how these fundings are wasted. And even in another counterterrorism program, the Fusion Centers, we saw another Senate report come out in 2012 stating that this type of intelligence gathering that's being funded by the Department of Homeland Security is actually a waste of resources and is very ineffective.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'd like to bring out my point.
Hold on, Elizabeth Thornton. Wait till you get called. Elizabeth Thornton next.
It's me.
Good morning. Welcome.
After the catastrophic and violence-inducing militarized response to protests in Ferguson, there were, on the national level, conversations about reviewing the Department of Defense-based 1033 grants, which contributed much to the militarization of police. Missing from that conversation is the fact that DOD-based grants have given $5 billion to that end. DHS-based grants have given 8 times that amount since the early 2000s toward that end. And on the top of DHS-based grants, contributing to militarization is the Urban Area Security Initiative. The grant that we were almost not allowed to speak on today, which may be the day that we hear that Darren Wilson won't be indicted. So I find it very disturbing and ironic that we're talking about hometown security at this meeting while almost not allowed to comment on this. And I really wonder, this is tens of millions of dollars of an allocation on top of, hundreds of millions of dollars, $650 million that LA has received alone from this program. And I just wonder why it isn't closer to the top of your agenda to protect us from the police's violent extremism.
Thank you. Herman.
It's Mr. Herman, sir. And with regards to the grant reward or award of $56 million, it is very disgusting that almost at this moment, the Brown Act violations were obviously confronted by your Sergeant of Arms violating this poor women's rights to be heard and throwing them out of a public meeting along with you canceling public comment. But in regards to what this $1 million of federal dollars, it's a waste. It's a waste because already senators and congressmen are getting involved in the proliferation of your misconduct to abuse federal dollars for such homeland security, when all along we know that Mayor Eric Garcetti has not infused us into the future with technology. So we're far behind, and yet you're asking the federal and the local government to suffice this measly $56 million in regards to no transparency? If it wasn't for these women, these RNs speaking this morning on behalf of myself, many constituents will be bamboozled by your arrogance and ignorance to allow us to communicate what this DOJ/JAG community law enforcement is all about. We don't want our privacy taken for granted. We deserve privacy, and we deserve the honesty without the corruption and scandal of taking us out of a public meeting and diffusing us not to be heard and oppose and be against this agenda item. And I don't even see it on the Friday, November 14th agenda meeting for council chambers in room 340. So, Sergeant of Arms, Mr. Duarte, do not violate our rights.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we'll approve item 1, send that to council, and with the end of the day, we will now adjourn the Public Safety Committee meeting. Thank you.